All yours.
Okay. Hello. My name is Jeremy McCullough. I work on the PHP driver. This slide is poorly formatted. There should not be a line break after my first name. Alex asked me to give a very important presentation today about pickles. So I'm going to talk to you about the dill with pickles. That is the first of many puns that you'll experience. I've been on parental leave, so that's why I'm currently presenting from the bathroom. There is not another quiet space in the house right now. I'll try not to flush. And so people ask, how long does it take to brine a pickle? So typically, if you're going to go for you want pickles like immediately, you're going to have to wait at least an hour, and that's assuming you're going to use vinegar. I'll get into the different styles of how we're making pickles later. But we have about 3 minutes, so I'm going to really rush through these slides. So try to keep up, and that's why it's being recorded. Feel free to refer back later. I'll apologize in advance. There's some animated GIFs here, GIFs, GIFs, whatever your preference. So you might have to, those might be a little choppy. You might have to come back to them, but I'll share the slides later as well. So again, I mentioned I work on the PHP driver. It is aptly summarized as this double-sided hammer. I didn't make this up. This actually exists, and it wasn't 3D printing. So somebody is like using actual metal to make this. This is real handiwork here, much like the PHP driver. And now pickle, where this thought came to Andreas and I and Alexander, because we really have nothing to do during our triage meetings. So we were just talking about ideas for things. And so in PHP, we publish our driver in a repository called PECL, which I've always pronounced as Pickle. Apparently it's pronounced pickle. And this is basically the package repository for PHP extensions. And this is, while I was making these slides, I've literally been working with PHP for more than 20 years. I've never realized that pickle is actually pronounced pickle. I've never heard anyone say pickle. So I don't know if this is like one of those fake Wikipedia edits where somebody just goes in and modifies something when they really shouldn't. But I'm just going to assume pickle is actually pronounced pickle. Not to be confused with pear, which is the other package repository that pickle is based on. I'm going to keep saying pickle because I don't agree with the pickle term. Pear is actually the original PHP package repository. Before we had extensions, we need to publish packages. And this is totally deprecated. Nobody uses this anymore. But with pickle, we're still using pickle, but we don't use pear. We have Composer for this, which you might have heard on. It's deployed to all the Evergreen hosts. So I'm sorry if you'll have PHP in your task runners. But this Composer, lovely, one of the better PHP projects, borrows inspiration from all these things. It's from Ruby Gems and Bundler, Python Package Index, NPM, the conflict resolution, the SAT solver was taken from OpenSUSE and ported to PHP. So much so that it borrows inspiration that we even have a left pad package, so you can just kind of take down your entire PHP infrastructure when somebody deletes this package from the Composer repository. Separately, now Composer is really made for PHP packages here, so we published the PHP library. The PHP driver has two parts, the library and the C extension, which uses libmongc. And Composer never really got off the ground making a way to install extensions. Thankfully, some folks came around like, we could pickle that. So they took their, we want Composer to be pickled. So they create a library called Friends of PHP, this is the organization, /pickle. And this is a modern clone of Pickle. Again, I'm still calling it Pickle. And it is meant to install PHP extensions. We haven't gotten around to using this yet, but it's basically lets you use your Composer JSON file, which is like packages.json, to define your extension requirements instead of having to use the command line. Or if you're on Windows, you have to download DLL files. So Pickle is meant to solve all that for you. Now, Pickle was actually made by this gentleman here on the left as one of the early people, not the guy all the way on the left, the guy in the middle with the smoking the cigarette. He's very European there. Pierre Joy used to work at Microsoft, so he has a big budget to play with PHP because no other company would allow him to spend his time in this manner. You might recognize the face second from the right. That's actually Derek Rethins. This photo was taken in 2004, back when Derek had more hair. And he was one of the early PHP folks there, and then we later hired him to work on the PHP driver. So it's kind of a big incestuous community of PHP developers here. I've never met Pierre. I'm sure he's lovely. Derek and him typically don't really get along. Now, if you're going back to that Pickle slide, the Friends of PHP Pickle, you'll notice the languages. This is actually, it's mostly PHP, of course, but it's actually also written in Gherkin, about 4% Gherkin language. And I'm not BSing you here. That's an actual language. The Gherkin language is a business-readable, domain-specific language. I'm not going to bore you with the details of that because we're already spending most of our day in Jira. But this is a behavioral-driven test program language. And to give you an example of what Gherkin syntax looks like, I'll take you through this scenario. So given a new user joins the driver Slack channel, and the user has a customer, and the customer is using Java, and the driver's topic says, quote, please don't ask or @here single language questions, When the user asks a question, then I will kindly remind them to read the channel topic and ask their question in Java. So this is for doing behavioral driven testing, kind of like spec tests, another way to do unit testing, functional testing, integration testing, not or original to PHP. Gherkin is actually borrowed from Ruby, which is the Cucumber project, which is a derivation of RSpec, was done for unit testing. Cucumber was done for behavioral driven testing. And this is where the Gherkin syntax come from. They have another example right there. With the comment, the tag and stuff. So white space is very important. It's compared to YAML in some respects. So obviously people don't like it for that reason. If you're wondering, yes, of course, this is all businessy. So of course, Cucumber integrates with Jira, and there's a company behind this. It's like cucumber.io. They have a fancy .io domain. So Bhat doesn't have any of that. PHP just has the .NET and the .orgs. So this, just going around for gherkins, I just threw the word gherkin at you. It's like, what is a gherkin? Maybe you don't know what a gherkin is, so I want to explain what a gherkin is. A gherkin is a type of cucumber. Gherkin is not necessarily a pickle. It's just a difference of pickle here. And it's always important to have gherkins in the home. So I keep gherkins in the pantry here, and boom, Trader Joe's cornichons, those are actually gherkins. Says Trader Joe's extra fine cornichons are gherkins, a small variety of cucumbers. Trader Joe's packaging always teaches you something. 12 fluid ounces, $2.49. Get them at your local Trader Joe's. Goes great with cheese. You're damn right it goes great with cheese. I eat these all the time. That's why I keep them in the pantry. There's always one jar in the fridge, one jar in the pantry. Pay no mind to the Butchette Bardi mini raviolis. That's from before I was married. Those are at least 10 years old. Now, going back for the gherkins, when I was searching Google for this, I noticed that gherkins, I was also searching for other things here at the time, and Google kept saying other related recent activity. I swear I was doing stuff on YouTube while logged out, searching for videos about pickles and things like that, and it was suggesting that, yes, we know you're looking for pickles, not just gherkins, not just cucumbers, gherkins and brine. So this made me very concerned. So I immediately switched to an incognito window so that no one could see any evidence of my pickle research, as well as my image searches for cucumbers. So this is where the shame bell went off, and I was very ashamed of what I was doing. You might recall this is actually Hannah Waddingham. She's in Ted Lasso. You think this has nothing to do with pickles? Well, actually, it does, because great Ted Lasso quote from season 2. Sometimes it's good to bottle things up. That's how we get pickles. But when you're too high strung, you wind up with Pickle Rick. And now let's go to a much nicer. So this is actual Pickle Rick. This is a animated version of Pickle Rick. This is where Rick and Morty, he accidentally turns himself into a pickle. Not the first time this is done in a children's cartoon, mind you. Not that children should be watching Rick and Morty. Use your parental controls wisely, folks. It was actually done in 2005. This is the Fairly Odd Parents. This is tweeted by the creator of that. So that was a pickle. They didn't have the merchandising, though, that Rick and Morty went. As anti-capitalist as Rick and Morty episodes tend to be, really a whole bunch of merchandising, just like in Spaceballs with the merchandising. So we have Pickle Rick Miracle Seltzer. If you're an adult, maybe you want some alcoholic seltzer. So that also exists, not made by Rick and Morty here, but I've never had this before, but it looks like it's just like a pickleback in a can, which I love picklebacks. We'll talk about those later. Also did a whole Pringles variety. I haven't had this was somewhere during the pandemic. I wasn't doing a lot of food shopping then last year. I was getting a lot of stuff delivered. Pickle Rick was pickle flavored Pringles, which I've actually had, not in this particular variety, but we've done Pringle tastings in the past. So this was the original Pringles dill pickle variety. I'll share all these. Yes, I have a whole playlist of videos where I do Pringles videos. Dill pickle was great. There was also Screamin' Dill Pickle, which I think was just sexier marketing. It was an extraordinary flavor, so I don't know if that's actually just marketing or something. They really just tasted the same. I love these flavors both times we had them, though. Really excellent. And you're wondering, hey, let's bring it back to the pickles. So I'm going to tell you about pickles here. So there's two types of pickling. There's lacto fermentation and there's vinegar pickling. And as I mentioned earlier, if you have just 1 hour, 3 hours of time, you could use vinegar pickling. Lacto fermentation is actually, you're not using vinegar. And this is kind of like, there's a debate of like, which is the better pickling? It's kind of like the Hatfield and McCoy's thing. So vegetable fermentation timeline, this is how a lot of cultures make their pickles. So before we have vinegar, it's really just salt and water. You're making a brine, whether you're brining a turkey, I don't know if you could pickle a turkey, but whatever. But if you're brining vegetables and things, you're using the salt in the brine, and you're creating that good probiotic bacteria here. It's going to help you poop great later. And the vegetable fermentation is going to take anywhere from like about 10 days, and then you can keep it going on for that. But when you do actual canning, then you're doing the vinegar canning. And so that's going to give shelf life of years. Yeah. So if you're worried about collapse of society and you want pickles in the future with those Trader Joe's cornichons, those are going to last forever. I'll go into that. There's no expiration date. It's a use by date. It's a best by date, but it's not an actual expiration date. They're going to be safe later. Fermentation, after a few months, you don't want to eat that. Maybe the bacteria comes back, it gets bad. But two different ways, two different approaches. Other cultures, very heavy on the lacto fermentation. You have Indian cultures, you have achar, typically like mangoes, carrots, any kind of pickles. I think a lot of us have had kimchi before. Chinese recipes, you have like pao tsai. yanzi, pickled cabbage. So all sorts of pickling. I feel in the West, we've kind of focused in on cucumbers and stuff, but there's like a whole spectrum of vegetables that you can pickle and eat, and they're delicious. And this was even at Mahogany Bee. This is back in the 229 West 43rd Street. I believe this was Emily Stoffel, one of the folks that worked on the Ruby Driver early on. She brought in some homemade pickles from home, and this was a lacto fermentation about it. So this was, there was no vinegar in this. It was just naturally pickling after a few weeks. And we had cucumbers in there. We had onions, little peppers. They were absolutely delicious. And then, as well as in the office with the pickle, we used to do sandwich days. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Shreya Romani. She no longer works here, but every time she ordered a sandwich, she always wanted a pickle on the side. So I was just reminded of this while I was just going back. And then until her final sandwich day, we eventually we got a whole bunch of pickles for everybody got pickles. So those are great. We don't do these anymore because I can't get me to set foot in the office these days. But and all the delis in Hoboken are closing. Going back to that, if you're just eating pickles on sandwiches, you're missing out. Now, I'm not going to push alcohol on you, but if you like a drink, I heartily recommend having picklebacks. This is one of those things where somebody was at a bar and they're like, why do you guys have pickle juice? Probably for the martini, and they held this extra pickle juice they never use because who's ordering the martinis these days? People get more fancier cocktails. So pickleback, basically a shot of alcohol, a shot of pickle juice, down to pickle juice after the alcohol or before. I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. These are delicious. And then Hendrix also makes a Hendrix gin-infused pickle, which was a crossover with Cat's Delicatessen. I can't speak for these. It doesn't look like they fit in the jar. So I think it's just marketing spiel. Now let's go. If you're thinking more locally, you want to find out about pickles, where do you find out about these crazy pickle ideas? Well, there's actually pickle conventions. The Lower East Side has a pickle day conference. I've never been to. It's probably got this guy in a suit. He looks like a fun guy to be around. As well as Picklesburg, which is actually in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's an annual pickle conference. I don't know, maybe they canceled it last year for COVID, but this is where they have competitive eating contests. Where like pickle juice, they probably have a pickle eating contest, but this happens to be a pickle juice drinking contest. Similar than the tickling, competitive tickling. I don't want to, this is a great documentary. I highly recommend you watch this, but not to be confused with competitive pickling, which also exists, and not to be confused with other food competitive sports such as hot dog eating. Now, you might know this, you may not know this, but Chicago hot dogs are actually served with pickles, and they basically just throw tons of vegetables. I promise you, there is a dog somewhere in there, but it's mostly vegetables. These are delicious. Shake Shack actually makes them. They call them the Drag to the Garden dog, Chicago dog. The more you know. This slide brought to you by WorstCon, my own personal hot dog conference. Thank you. Moving on. So pickleball, in a realm of other competitive sports, we have pickleball. Now, I had never heard about this. I thought this was a joke because they're building parks in Hoboken. But if you look at pickleball, since 2004, it kind of like really ramped up. It kind of looks like ping pong. It's like a cross between ping pong and tennis. And just in the most recent years, pickleball has like shot up in interest over time in Google Trends. I don't know where they pull these stats from, but it's probably about as reliable as our driver usage stats from Atlas, maybe a little more reliable. So Hoboken parks these days, the Hoboken pickleball at sundown, they're taking over our parks and putting in these like giant little ping pong looking pickleball. Has nothing to do with pickles. I'm very confused by this. Now, if we actually compare this to tennis, which is like the bigger sport of this, tennis obviously mops the floor with pickleball. So no, people are really, pickleball is like a king in a small country here, but tennis is really where it's at. Now, you may be asking yourself philosophically, can that which is pickled be unpickled? And I promise I'm going to wrap things up here in the next 30 seconds. So I'd be remiss, again, not to mention that Python, they use pickling as a term for object serialization. And big warning here, huge warning, pickling is not secure. Only unpickle the data you trust. So in this case, you can unpickle data that malicious unpickling. You don't want to deal with dangerous pickles. So maybe pickles are poison. In the same sense, you could have poison serialization things. So hopefully our BSON serialization tickets will get rid of this. This is why we can't have null bytes on our key characters, folks. So much like the go-to, and again, the only educational bit on this slide will be to our C developers, all three of you. Go-to considered harmful, so please use it responsibly, much like unpickling in Python. And with that, I'll leave it open for questions, but that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.